is the third session on leaders in the corporate world and foundations. We have three distinguished speakers for this session. Each one will speak for 15 minutes, and then we will have questions and answers towards the last 15 minutes of this session. So let's get started. I would like to first invite Dr. David Asai, who is the Senior Director for Science Education at Howard Hughes Medical Institute. David, please.
Thank you. I want to first just applaud the organizers for creating this space today to share ideas. I've really enjoyed and learned a lot from the speakers in the preceding sessions. And I hope that my comments today will reinforce many things that they've already said. So in my presentation today, I'm going to use the term peers, P-E-E-R-S, instead of URMs. Peers are persons excluded because of ethnicity or race. In preparing for today's topic, I was reminded of the paper published last year by Maricela Martinez-Cola, who is at Utah State University. Her paper, entitled Collectors, Nightlights, and Allies, Oh My, White Mentors in the Academy, is an autoethnographic essay that is written from the perspective of a person of color as they perceive their white faculty mentors. Professor Martinez-Cola's three categories of mentors, I think, offer a useful framework for understanding the evolution of leaders who wish to advance diversity. So here are her three categories, using my words. So the first is collectors. Collectors are by far the most common. A collector wants to help peers, and a collector almost always is certain that they know what is best for the persons they want to help. A collector commoditizes peers and is focused on fixing the student. A collector's goal is to help the peers assimilate into the culture of science, a culture which was not created by nor for the peers. A collector often places the burden of teaching us about race and racism on the very victims of racism. I've heard well-meaning collectors declare that, you know, when Black and brown students dress nicely and sit in the front row and ask questions, their behavior will somehow transform and change the culture of this institution. And of course, we're all familiar with the diversity tax, in which a person from an excluded group is asked to serve on every diversity-related committee: admissions, faculty recruiting, mentoring, advising, the so-called DEI committees, because the rest of us depend on the peers to carry the burden. The second category is what Maricela calls nightlights. Nightlights get it. They've done some work to understand the challenges of being a peer in a white-centered culture. A nightlight is willing to step up and run interference. A nightlight, like a collector, often commoditizes peers, but the action of a nightlight is different. Instead of aiming to fix the peer to fit into a foreign culture, a nightlight is prepared to help the peer figure out how to navigate that foreign culture. The nightlight's support is typically situational and sporadic and not omnipresent. The third category are allies. Allies are the most aware of the experiences of peers because they have accepted their responsibility to continuously learn. An ally makes meaningful connections with peers without claiming equivalent personal experience. An equivalent personal experience, for example, is when a person claims to understand what it is to be a person of color because they grew up poor or in a single parent family. Rather than commoditize peers, an ally is a peer. An ally understands that it is their responsibility to work with peers to recenter the culture of science on inclusion so that every person knows that they belong and that the system expects them to succeed. An ally has done the work rather than place the burden of change on the peer. So collectors, nightlights, and allies is a helpful metaphor to understand how both systems and individuals can evolve. Most of us start off as collectors, and our goal should be to progress to Nightlights and eventually allies. At the systems level, we have long recognized the importance of increasing diversity in science. We heard some of our distinguished leaders from many years now talk about the work and the fight that has gone on for decades. But even after 5 decades of effort, even after tens of billions of dollars spent on programs, much of what we do today is still based on the collector mindset, a mindset whose goal is to fix the peer so that they will assimilate into a scientific culture not designed by or for them. Fix the peer, or as I might say in a weaker moment, blame the victim. Activities are things like pre-college summer bridge programs, undergraduate research experiences, special advising, remedial courses, and GRE preparation workshops. These interventions are certainly important and certainly help the people who participate, but they are not sufficient to change the system. And the system rewards clever collectors. Collectors get points when they can show off a peer or two, when it is time to illustrate a brochure or a website, or when they are preparing for a departmental or institutional accreditation visit. We get points for being able to list peers when we are applying for training grants. The system rewards clever collectors with resources. For example, there are so-called minority supplements to NIH and NSF research grants and cluster hires for diversity. And if you think about that, the premise there is that it's as if we wouldn't have a peer in our lab, or we wouldn't hire peers to our faculty without monetary incentives. Collectors, Nightlights, and Allies is also a metaphor for individual development, how each of us can evolve as leaders. I'd like to share with you a bit of my personal story to try to indicate particular events from long ago that apply to my work today. And I hope you'll listen for 3 themes: exploring cultural identity, having credibility with the persons we're trying to influence, and the importance of humility. So as a student, I studied chemistry and biology. Among the many subjects that I did not study are psychology, sociology, anthropology, education, ethnic studies, economics, history, law. I think that makes me like many other scientists. I do not have the foundation in the disciplines that are so important to understand the scholarship of education, the scholarship of mentoring, of inclusion, and culture change. But I can learn from others who have expertise in these subjects, and I should remember the importance of humility. So I became a cell biologist. I led a research lab for more than a quarter of a century. We published lots of papers and won our share of research grants. I mentored undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs, technicians. I was a faculty member for nearly 19 years at Rita's alma mater, Purdue University. And then I moved and spent 5 years at Harvey Mudd College. Through all that time as a faculty member, I enjoyed teaching, especially introductory courses to biology majors and non-majors. In addition to my research and teaching, I served my departments and universities. I was head of the very large Department of Biological Sciences at Purdue, and I was chair of the relatively tiny Department of Biology at Harvey Mudd. Mudd's Department of Biology was 1/10 the size of my department at Purdue. Now, many years later, my experiences as a faculty member, trying to balance research and teaching and service, has given me, I hope, a modicum of credibility in my present job. My present job is to persuade other scientists to do some hard and important work, to join me in working on the things that most of us were not formally trained to do, to learn how to teach inclusively, to engage in culturally aware mentorship, to work towards inclusive excellence. So at Purdue, I began to care about how the system prepares students for science. But while it was easy for me to complain about what I perceived as the poor preparation of incoming graduate students, I realized that the responsibility for preparing future graduate students rests on me and the many others who teach undergraduates. So if I wanted to see better graduate students, then what could I do to improve undergraduate science education? I also began to recognize the importance of ensuring that science was a place where all students could be successful, especially those from underrepresented groups. Early role models for me were Purdue biochemistry professor Vic Rodwell and his wife Meredith. Vic and Meredith almost single-handedly ran a long-standing program in which they brought to Purdue peer undergraduates from other schools and placed them in labs for the summer. For many years, my lab hosted one of the Mark Ames students. Now, during this time, I also served on the department's graduate admissions committee, including 5 years as chair. And I made it my mission to increase the ethnic diversity of our graduate student population. At the end of my 10 years on the committee, peers comprised approximately 20% of our 100+ graduate students. So all of this to say that for much of my time at Purdue, I was trying to help peers by having them in my lab. I was trying to increase the number of peers in my department. In short, I was a collector. Now, my perspective changed dramatically in the year 2000 when I was department head at Purdue. I attended a 3-day forum on race, which was sponsored by the university. The forums were designed and facilitated by a diverse team of experts from outside of Purdue. The team was led by Janice Eddy and included Barbara Berry, Isaura Cepeda, Ann Kusamoto, and Bill Page. So in those days, the 3-day forum took place over a long weekend at a hotel some distance from campus. There were about 40 of us who attended. We were all faculty leaders from the schools of agriculture and science. Through all kinds of activities, the facilitators encouraged us to do 2 things that most science faculty are not comfortable doing. Number 1, we talked about race. And number 2, we grappled with race at the emotional level as well as intellectually, from the heart as well as the head. We participated in various exercises aimed at getting us to express our own cultural identity and to understand how it feels to be excluded. And we practiced listening, not listening to engage in an argument, not listening while thinking about what to say next, but just listening to understand, to give the speaker all of our attention to hear what they had to say. We practiced talking about emotional things, we practiced talking about race, and we practiced listening to understand. On the 3rd day, the facilitators asked the faculty to form a circle around the periphery of the room in a fishbowl exercise in which about a half a dozen or so recent alumni who are persons of color, engaged in a conversation between themselves led by one of the facilitators. And because we had spent the previous 2 days practicing listening, we faculty were, I hope, a little bit better prepared to hear from our former students. Those students talked about how it felt to be in our classrooms, our laboratories, our departments. They talked about always being watched, but never seen. They talked about having to shed aspects of their cultural identities, such as language or appearance, in order to be safe in our environment. So that forum on race, now more than 20 years ago, marked the beginning of something different for me. I began to understand that it isn't about simply collecting diversity, it's about making the environment more inclusive. It's about paying attention to feelings, how it feels to have to justify every day that you belong, how it feels to constantly be on guard, to survive in an environment not of your making. That first forum on race was the moment when I began to evolve from a collector to a nightlight. And ever since then, I have tried to keep learning and work to develop programs that go beyond treating the students and instead focus on us, the present population of scientists and faculty and administrators, because we have the responsibility to build a culture centered on inclusion. Over the years, I participated in many more workshops, some led by Janice and others designed by other organizations. Janice and her team came to Harvey Mudd College, where in 3 forums, we were able to cover nearly all of the faculty and senior staff. When I moved to HHMI, our team has hosted workshops on various topics, including implicit bias, microaggressions, and anti-bias and anti-racism. And we have encouraged others to engage in similar activities through our grants. The HHMI Inclusive Excellence the HHMI Driving Change initiatives, and our Faculty Forums initiative each provide funding to colleges and universities for faculty to engage in facilitated conversations on race and cultural differences. And in partnership with the University of Wisconsin's Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences in Research, or CIMER, the HHMI Gilliam Graduate Program provides the dissertation advisors of the Gilliam Graduate Fellows a year-long mentorship training course that explores culture. For example, CIMER leads the Culture Box activity, in which each of us shares a family artifact as a way to introduce the idea that all of us, regardless of our race or ethnicity, has a cultural identity. So I don't know where I am on Dr. Martinez-Cola's continuum, but I know that I still have a long way to go before I can say that I'm a genuine ally. I want to continue to learn by reading and listening to others. I try to find a lesson in every article, every meeting, every conversation, even when I don't agree with what is being said. And it's important to keep practicing. So today, I've talked about cultural identity, credibility, and humility. Thank you for letting me share my story today.